Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lush and Salty Aquariums. My name is Stefan. Thank you for coming to the channel. Okay, so it's a quiet afternoon in my house, in my household, and ergo my fish room. And I was thinking as I was doing a messy job, how can I maintain a robust fish room full of life, multiple aquariums, cultures of live food, um, sumps, many canister filters operating simultaneously, all on one system in an apartment, essentially an old apartment building in Chicago, with a wife and earlier with children. How can I keep a healthy, vigorous, wonderful fish room and maintain a healthy, vigorous, and wonderful family life as well? Now, we see a lot of jokes on these channels about our, tolerant spouses, or, um, how we have to be covert when we're doing certain jobs, and considerations when we're using kitchen appliances and tools for our hobby. If your spouse is like mine, she has, if she wasn't tolerant from Jump Street, has become tolerant and supportive as you move through the hobby. There's many reasons for that, namely, your partner, your life partner, loves you and wants to support your passions, and I would do the same for her. So that piece, goes without saying. If you don't have that stuff worked out, your fish room's probably going to be tucked away in a man cave somewhere, and in a sense has the you don't see it anymore, but do you remember when you were a kid, the no girls allowed kind of sign? But that's not the case in my household. I don't have the luxury of a hidden spot, a basement or a garage, or a back room or a shed like so many of you have, where you can keep your fish room, as you want it, in the condition you want it, and not be worried about any criticism or judgments or problems arising from your life partners, your family, and even to some extent people that are in your apartment from time to time. You won't give them the willies or freak anybody out with, let's just say, a open culture of microworms or live potato beetle larvae, which is pretty gnarly when you pull back some of the stuff to get to the good, all the wiggling worms. That's, by most people think that's gross and disgusting. I find it fascinating and compelling, and I can spend an hour pulling peanut beetle larvae out from a culture, or working on grindle worms, which is my newest project I'm excited to start, processing the microfauna that I got from Tony at Phillips Tank Works, and growing my own planting emergent growth in my sump and out of my aquariums. It becomes like a greenhouse inside your house. And it's not just plants, which most people love having in their homes in some capacity. It's all the swimming and wriggling and crawling and creeping things that occupy the planted aquarium. You multiply that by 4, 5, 6, and you've got a menagerie, right? And so over time, I've learned how to be as considerate as possible with the other people in my household when it comes to keeping this hobby, and comes to keeping my family and my marriage, intact, to be honest. My wife would be the first to admit she's a neat freak, and she keeps this house in tip-top shape, and it almost is a nervous habit for her to be cleaning, And that's on her, that's on her childhood, and that's, it's all good stuff because it keeps her engaged and happy. Sort of like when you're trimming an aquarium or doing water changes. It's a chore, but it makes you feel good doing it. And you need to get into the zone with feeling good doing the chores. Otherwise, it's going to be an uphill battle. You're always going to be cleaning up messes one day too late, or getting a note, stuck on your door saying, there's a puddle by this, or there's a clod of dirt over here, and that can get contentious. And the good news is it doesn't have to ever be like that, and it hasn't been this way in my house ever, honestly. And that comes from that first point I gave. Well, the first point is being in a loving and supporting relationship where your partner is glad you have this thing that makes you happy. All right, so that is table stakes. But the second thing is to maintain a clean and orderly fish room, and this is especially true if you don't have a secret place to go and keep your hobby, like a shed or a man cave. In those places, if you let things go to seed a little bit, you don't do your tank maintenance for a few weeks, or you're lazy, or you have some sort of personal health issue, and excuse the shaking there, and your fish room suffers for it, at least no one else in the household is privy to those problems. And what I have to do in an apartment, literally the bedrooms are down that hall, down the hall there, and the kitchen is, just behind me as I do a spin. It's through and in there it is, you see. I'm doing basically a 360 around my fish room, which essentially, for anyone else, this would just be a den with a TV set on the wall and a comfy chair and a lamp and, a bookshelf, right, or something along those lines. But for me, it houses countless aquariums, and I have to keep them in tip-top shape, not just because it's good for the fish and the animals in the aquarium, but it's good for the animals in your household. And by animals, I mean mammals, I mean human beings. And I'm going to tell you, if you don't love doing the chore, and there's a ton of chores, water changes alone, even with the python, trimming aquariums, Planet Aquariums, once they get going, they need attention every week, honestly. Now you can let things just absolutely go, go to heavily jungle, I call it the jumble jungle, or the organized chaos of a nature aquarium. That's great. I like to do that myself. But if you start detecting any odor, not only is that a sign that there's a problem for your livestock, but man, let me tell you, if this fish room had any odors, we'd be in divorce court, because that would be a line that I know I cannot cross, and that's to have the perpetual smell. When you go in an old mom and pop fish store, or even a Petco, and you get down into the various aisles and you smell the pets, that can't be the case when you're maintaining a fish room and you share your home with other people. It's not fair to them, and it'll really create problems, and that this is obvious, but some people probably are having these problems, so the way to circumvent that is to prevent it, not, what's that old saying, hire a lawyer to get you out of trouble instead. But the real thing you should do is hire a lawyer to prevent you from getting in trouble in the first place, not to try to get you out of trouble once you're in trouble. I have preventative measures, and that means being religious with my maintenance, so that these aquariums, even if a spouse or a sibling or a child has zero interest in the hobby and only occasionally looks at your fish and asks a question now and again, it'll be benign in every other respect. So this fish room for me has to be a room in the house like all the others in terms of its orderliness, its cleanliness, and it's especially true for me because I'm in an apartment building. There are people above and below me. Now, this beautiful old building, I never hear them, and God forbid I ever have a catastrophic leak, because then I have a super problem downstairs, and I do things to make sure that that doesn't happen, but shit happens, so put your canisters on trays that at least will capture some water if it's a slow leak. Make sure all your fasteners on the tubing is as tight as it can be. Check almost as soon as you think about it. Do a quick spot check, because honestly, leaking tanks is a rarer problem than a disengaged hose. And if that motor is running and it's the wrong hose, it'll just pump all the water out till you get below the gravity line. And that's gallons, and it could be a real problem, not just for your hardwood floors, but potentially for the neighbor below you. And so I really have to be on top of that, because you can't just have those accidents and keep on keeping on. You're going to have to change, stop. There'll be a, sit down, listen, we got to do something about Stefan. And there'll be an intervention to stop your hobby. And it is an addiction, so the intervention is a funny but apropos term if you're getting into like problem. I am so glad I don't have that problem yet, knock on wood, but inevitably there will be issues. Now, sometimes when I do a 3-hour marathon session, pieces of plant matter fall to the floor, I miss it, they dry up, there's little pooling puddles from when I walk back and forth carrying a net, stuff like that. So when I'm done, I kind of go around with a towel and try to wipe as much of that stuff up. I try to keep the space around my aquariums clean, like you see in front here. A lot of people, when they don't have to keep it clean, it starts to get pretty messy and collect stuff. So obviously, if you have a fish room in the situation I'm in, you absolutely need an organized and sizable space to keep your stuff. I've got it marked, I've got it labeled and displayed. If I was out of town and I had to ask my wife to do something, go in and get a clamp, or can you get this specific fish food, it's organized enough to where she could actually do that for me. And if you have your own fish room in a shed, you can be more of a slob. I don't have the luxury of being a slob. This is my dining room, right? This is where we eat. This is where we have morning coffee, and so this is also where I have my massive 135-gallon display tank. If this thing wasn't as beautiful and clean and functioning as it is, I'd really be up a creek. Now, I wouldn't want to have a tank that was kind of stinky and rank and with water below here, I'll get to it, and too many floating plants, and the sump is starting to stink. I don't even ever get close to that happening because that's the OCD kind of hobbyist I am. But the reason this third most important reason, second most important reason, is because I share this home and therefore this hobby with my spouse, and I don't want to jeopardize that relationship because of the hobby, and I also don't want to jeopardize the hobby because of that relationship. So it's a symbiotic relationship that you have with your family and your fish room. Now, one aquarium is still no excuse to let you. There's nothing sadder than going to someone's house, like when you go over for brunch or a dinner or something, or for drinks, and you notice like in the corner is this 10-gallon aquarium with clown puke gravel and a couple really sad skirt tetras, and you point it out, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we got that for Jimmy, and he doesn't really like it, and we don't, I don't even know what to do. I haven't changed the filter in a year longer." And that just kind of, I get it, because if you're not passionate about the hobby, it is just a huge chore, and you sort of question why you did it in the first place. And I don't judge people or criticize them. I actually offer to help. I can fix that up for you, if you promise to keep it going, and I'll show you how, blah, blah, blah. And that conversation's usually a pretty short one. So what I'm talking about is here in my house, the things I do. I keep all the front surfaces really clean. I've got these like wonderful laminate plastic or acrylic shelving units. I've got canisters and trays. I've got as much as I can going on I'm trying to find the right imagery. I've got house plants surrounding and hiding some of the equipment. I'm walking around, so excuse this effect. I hope you guys are patient with me, as my wife is patient with me. But like this really cool, fun wallpaper, that's how I shared the hobby with my wife. She helped me to decorate in that regard and found this wallpaper. So she becomes invested in what this room looks like. And that's another key, if she's showing off her home, like an aunt or an uncle comes over and you want to give them the tour. And when they come to this space, I'm so proud because people like, that's the best room in the house. Now, that's not true from an aesthetic perspective. Maybe it is. In my opinion, it's damn near. But it makes me feel good to hear people say that. And then it makes my wife feel good to hear people say that. And so moving forward, when she thinks about this fish room and her husband, she's not going to look at it as, my dirty little secret, or, that's his gross man cave, I never go in there, and all that kind of talk. It's not the case here. It could not be the case here because I'm in a main thoroughfare, this fish room, as I pointed out. I mean, here I back into the kitchen, right? Boom. And here I back into the dining room. Boom. It's literally the center of this apartment. So an organized storage space, job one. Try to hide the equipment or camouflage it and keep it running so that you don't hear the machinery. I mean, I'm talking over about 6 filters and more bubblers and all kinds of other stuff coming on and off with the timers. And it's just a nice, pleasant white noise, a slight gurgling effect. And in the dining room, you can hear the sump, but it sounds like you maybe can hear it. It's no louder than the traffic outside on Lakeshore Drive, a few floors down below and 100 yards away or whatever it is. And it's peaceful and it doesn't interfere with the TV if they're watching in the living room, and it doesn't interfere if they're having a conversation. It doesn't interfere with their life is I guess the one way of putting it. And I don't want it to, that's a baseline. Don't let it interfere with your home life. But I want it to contribute to my home life. I don't expect people to love aquariums and fish keeping the way I do. That would be unfair expectation, and resentments would immediately follow. Instead, I try to make it as beautiful and captivating as possible, understanding that if those aren't the right adjectives to describe what's going on in your household, that it is completely benign, that it's causing no harm, no friction, there's no messes, there's no smells, and I haven't heard this kind of talk. I hear the jokes on YouTube about, if you're using Tupperware, don't tell your wife, or use the cheap stuff. And yeah, that's all, don't ask, don't tell is a part of this hobby, I guess, in a way. But One thing I do is I do the messiest chores when my spouse isn't here. And she knows that, because then I can clean up. And when she comes home and she's been out working and she's tired, the last thing she wants is to start, having to clean up after me, which would be her instinct to do. So I know that about her, and I do the messy stuff. Like if I'm cleaning out the sump, and it's gonna get messy, or if I'm doing a redo on an aquascape or setting up a new aquarium, rinsing gravel, stuff like that. I do it all when she's not here, and I clean up after myself. I I feel, as a middle-aged man, that's kind of insane to have to say I clean up after myself. But this is different than eating, tacos in front of a football game. This is significant gatekeeping. I'm God of all these creatures, and as their God, I cannot be a indifferent God. I need to be on top of my game. So my aquariums are as beautiful as they can be to make me happy, but as benign and better yet, as contributory to a pleasant household and home experience for whoever might walk to and fro within my fish room. This is not a man cave. Girls are allowed. I've got 3 daughters and a wife, so listen, I've got a lot of females who don't have an interest in this hobby whatsoever, but they have an interest in me, and I'd like to keep it that way. And I bet you would too. So, as always, keep your hands in the tank, and when you do, clean up afterwards. Okay, everybody, I hope you appreciated this little sermon, if you will, but it's all to make everybody happier. Trust me. Okay, everybody, ciao for now.